Like the nothing but the soil in the earth, breaking through the rocks, growing wild and tall till the buds begin to pop. So pack me in a bowl or roll me in a spliff. While you're breaking me down, you can feel your fingers stiff.
Hey, this is Ryan Herron and Amanda Breeze here to talk about all the fun stuff about one of our favorite plants, cannabis. Stick with us for updates on the industry, the most dank herb, and explorations of flavor, aroma, and effects. How's it going today, Amanda?
My day is going great. I'm here on the farm, so I'm very sticky
Yes.
and just taking care of all the plants. We had a really bad storm a few days ago, and not everything was properly caged, and so a lot of the plants were very top heavy and they went once they fell down. So I've just been running around today, tying strings like a crazy spider and trying to get everything back up on its feet again.
Nice. Well, other
Yeah.
than that, have you guys had a pretty good end of season?
We're still going, probably we usually harvest here is like maybe a month away, maybe a
Okay.
little less, like, the next 3 4 weeks. Like we actually really push it until like the first or second frost sometimes.
Oh, wow.
We even pushed it to the third because a lot of our plants are actually quite frost hardy. So sometimes, we test the limits. And this might be one of those years because stuff's just like doesn't look even quite ready. It's not, nothing's quite finished yet. So it's going to need those last few weeks to pull together. So I'm just wildly defoliating out there, trying to get the plants back in action and doing the right moves. So yeah, it's a great, sunny, beautiful day. And yeah, it's been fantastic here. How are you doing?
Nice. Man, I'm doing great. There's really nothing too exciting going on this end. We just finished up the tech issue for the Oregon Leaf magazine, so that is, I think, hitting newsstands in a couple of days. So by the time this comes out, it should be all over Oregon. Go pick that up. In fact, if you're in a legal state, there's likely a Leaf magazine that you can pick up, and there's probably some of my writing in there. So go ahead and pick that one up.
Cool.
Yeah, not too bad. It's always fun when the magazines come out because I get a lot of like, hey, this is great. I really like this thing that you wrote. And then I also get a handful of, hey, you screwed this thing up. The lineage on this is actually this other thing. And I'm like, I know, because I've been corrected twice. So
Oh
yeah,
no.
it's fun on both ends. And then beyond that, I've just been kicking back. I'm trying to think if I've smoked anything good lately because really I'm on the hunt for whatever's good and kind of anticipating the this year's outdoor harvest coming in. We've had a really nice end of season with hardly any rain, some really warm days and nights, and I think people are having really nice um, season. So that's going to mean a lot of good herb here soon. I can't wait.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, I mean, I know we got that little storm here, but same here. The weather's been super nice otherwise, not like last year's like water war that went down and the rain and the mold was crazy. Like I just walked through the whole garden and only found, a couple little bits of mold here and there, which is totally normal.
Yeah.
That's perfectly normal for outdoor. And so it was not, that's basically nothing, and yeah, I think it's really going to be a really good season here too. Just feels like everything's working out as long as this like crazy hurricane weather doesn't all of a sudden move up in our direction. I think we should be good here too.
Very nice. So are there some specific plants that you have your eye on? Like, oh, I cannot wait until this one is in a jar.
We're growing a couple of Oregon grape crosses,
Fun.
and the grapes are just always my favorite. It's like very nostalgic for me. That grape smell, I just love it so much.
Yes.
And so we have a few crosses that we're bringing out here. We have some really beautiful Northern Lights crosses. We do a lot of breeding here, so a lot of the stuff is like house strains that we've done for I've been here for about 4 years now. So it's some house strains that we've been working on every year. One's like an Afghan hash plant cross. And the Northern Lights, we have a bunch of crosses of that too. And then we have an actual house strain we call B96. And the B96 has always been really high terpene profile.
Cool.
Like I know it's like 2% is the average, but I swear it's like 90%. It's just ridiculous. I'll never test it. Just trust me on that one.
Yeah, no, hey, I believe it.
It's so pungent and very similar to Blue Dream in its like exciting flavor and that kind of bubble gummy sort of, it's hard to describe, but B96 is one of our best. And well, part of the reason it's hard to describe is because we've done a bunch of different crosses with it.
Yeah.
So B96 4 years ago was a little different, and B96 this year is shaping up so nicely. And when you have a nug that almost looks like a teddy bear when it has the bulby sort of calyxes.
Totally.
Like sometimes they're very spiky and sometimes they're very like teddy bear, little cuddly ears. It reminds me of like little kitty ears. I don't know what it is, like cute and fuzzy and you just want to squeeze it. It looks like that right now. It's so cute.
I love that. Farmhouse Studio has like a name for that. What is it? It's like nubs or like nodules or whatever. But they're saying like those plants have like even more surface area, and so they tend to wash really well, yeah, hey, I love it. That's my favorite kind of herb.
So we got a couple of those going. I feel like the Northern Lights tend to lean towards that the way we grow them here. And then we have some really nice, we have a pond and there's a few things growing down by the pond that are really, really, really purple. So they're just giving me like festive Halloween feels, like really super purple, almost black leaves and bright green centers. So it's like this purple and neon green Halloween energy. Yes. And then right next to it is its opposite. So it's like really, really green leaves and crazy purple flowers. So we have some fun colors. I'm excited. I mean, I've been in the garden all day. I was telling you, I got nug vision, which is when you're just like staring at the plants for so long that every time you close your eyes, you just see leaves. And then of course, during trim season, it becomes, while you're trimming for so long, every time you look outside and see a tree, your mind's like, how would I trim that? And you start to visualize trimming like
so
pine trees on the lawn. Like that's how
you're like, wow, these neighborhood trees look a little shaggy. I need to get somebody out here.
Yeah, you're like, I might take that down a little on that side. So yeah, right now every time I'm blinking, I'm just seeing leaves. But we're gonna try to get in the zone here because today's episode is actually very exciting. I've been really looking forward to this one because it's a question that both you and I get asked quite a bit.
Yeah, someone just reached out this week and we're asking basically, how can I smell like that, right? How can I stick my nose in something and come away with like 20 descriptive words that I can translate to someone else? Like, would you say that's a good way of summing it up?
Yeah, like how do I get better at smelling?
Yeah, I think that's a really concise way of putting it.
I'm not even sure that's full grammar or how grammar works, but getting better at smelling is the question that I get a lot. So that is today's episode.
Yeah. And you know what? Hey, it's a really good thing for us because it's art and it's science, right? It's a little bit of like, what can you do? And then what can you learn to help like increase your knowledge, right? And then I think a lot of people falsely think, oh, you must be a super taster or you must have some genetic advantage. And like, while that might be the case, like, since we talk about communication so much on the show, like that's the superpower, right? Not just having this like big nose, which I do have, but also being able to like take that, break it into parts and tell it to the person next to you in a way that they go, oh, this does smell like an old teddy bear, or whatever fun descriptors you can come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've said it before, but this is a learned skill. So this is actually something like, even though, everyone can smell, we always smell things every day, actually honing that skill. requires effort and practice. So anyone can do it. It's not exclusive. I've read that women are better at smelling than men, but
Believe it.
not by much. It's still possible. And it actually, one of the books we both read, they debunked the myth of dogs having more scent receptors than humans as well. We're actually up there and have a lot of scent receptors as well. We're just not as good at identifying those aromas, which is really what we're doing when we're talking about smelling weed. Identifying aromas.
Right. Exactly. And you know what? I think like I say this sometimes, like if you have no base for this at all, then that's fine. Just use things you do have a base of knowledge for to describe it. So if that's movies, you can say, I don't know, this reminds me of Roger Rabbit, whatever. Great. You've now like got a touch point that you can tell to someone else, or you can think on, or you can set that in your mind. So the next time you come across another scent that's a lot like it, you can say, oh, this reminds me of that. Right. So
exactly.
You don't have to be too specific, but a good place to start is right there on things that already have flavor and aroma notes. The bag of coffee I have says cherry, plum, cedar. Great. I can brew a cup. I can open the beans. All throughout that process, I can smell for those touchstones and see if they connect with me at all.
Absolutely. And it's funny you would mention comparing it to other things like branching out from aroma, because the first time I was ever asked to assess the aroma of 3 strains, it was the blue cookies, the blue dream, and a blue fire. And
Fun.
I didn't realize how hard describing these smells would be. I thought it would be so easy. And so I remember one of the descriptions, I wrote something like, it reminds me of smoking weed in high school. And they were like, you actually can't say that because that's not legal. And I was like, that's a good point. Okay, noted. But that's where my mind went. The smell, it had a memory that it was tied to, it had something that connected me to those younger days. And that more than that, the feeling of the first few times you skip 4th period and rip a doobie. So it was very reminiscent of that. And that's an interesting story. And that's not one we used in that situation, but that's a good example of tying the smell of things into these more tangible concepts and memories, which is really a big part of identifying cannabis aromas and describing them.
Yeah. And I mean, it can be, and like the art and science thing, about expression and communication, right? So if I want to say that this smells like driving a stolen car, right? That's evocative. That okay, it's maybe gassy, there's maybe a leather smell to it, there's some excitement there. That's probably not going to be on a bag of coffee, right? But if you write weed ads for a living and need to convey something, and you're not necessarily trying to communicate, but instead express something about the flower, well, then you have a lot more artistic freedom, right? To say like, hey, this reminds me of like skipping 7th period and smoking half a joint behind the gym. Then I think like that can put people in a place where they can like connect with other sensory moments that are not just like cut grass, baseball, like those sort of like more specific descriptors.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk about some techniques that you and I use to identify specifically aroma. And then, I'd like to get into a little more of like the adjective ways of describing things, using more adjectives and bringing in more descriptors too, more colorful language. But at its base, the main thing these days is what we're seeing with cannabis packaging is that it is listing its terpenes. So when people first ask me like, hey, how do I get better at smelling? If you're a regular smoker, you're smoking all the time, a really easy first step is to smell the package, smell what's in the package, and look at the package and see what terpenes are in it. Can you identify any of these aromas? Are you catching any of these smells? Like at this point, every cannabis educator there's a ton of information on the internet about what limonene, myrcene, beta caryophyllene. I'm sure by now most people who are interested in honing their aromatic skills are already familiar with some of the base terpenes in general. And so we can just take the package, give it a whiff, and see what's actually in there. And is this the kind of energetics that we're getting? Are we actually able to pull out any of these smells from the packaging? So that's like a good first step. Similarly, having isolates that you're working with are huge for practicing honing your aromatic skills. So I know you have a ton of terpene isolates. I have a ton of terpene isolates as well. And so I literally practice smelling and memorizing those smells.
Yeah, and it's really simple to grab some perfume strips or Q-tips even, and set your system up. Say you only have 3 terpene isolates, right? Or even 3 terpene blends, and one is limonene dominant and one is beta C dominant, right? You can blind smell those, very easily tell the difference from them. But the more you add to those, now you have 7 in your lineup. Now you have 14. You have a really great experience, like a really locked in memory with both limonene and beta C, because you were just sitting there with both of them, smelling them against each other, and they're wildly different. So then when you start adding things in like humulene, that does have like a beta caryophyllene type of scent, that's that same sort of like woodsiness, that they're more easily, you can more easily tell them apart because you have a better base of knowledge because you built your catalog up slowly, right? And same thing with anything you want to smell. I think spices are one of the easiest, best things you can practice at home with, because I mean, you are smelling terpenes. That's what it is, and other aroma compounds. And they're relatively inexpensive. They're super fun, and hey, they've got some utility. Like I have a thing of star anise up in my cabinet to smell, but if I had to make some like pho broth or whatever, like boom, it's right there, and I'm going to use it, and I know it's fresh because I bought it just a couple of months ago.
Absolutely. And I like to review the things in my head too, like as I'm smelling them. So if I'm catching a waft, I'll have a little dialogue with myself and try to think, what are 3 words that could actually describe the smell that I'm experiencing? Like, star anise, like maybe it's a little on the spicy side. Maybe if some spices will feel more rounded, and different things might have some sort of shapes to them or some sort of sounds. Like you can start to combine wherever your mind goes, let it go there, because that's actually what's interesting. We're looking to create a language. And because there isn't a set, the terpene scientific terms is really the set language of these smells, because a terpene is a singular aromatic note. So that's the language, but that's the boring language. What we're looking for is the fun language, the more descriptive language. So yes, orange has limonene in it, but it also has zest. Like what are we really truly getting from these cool smells? And in the way that you work with spices, I also work with essential oils, and I find those to be really great to work with, because you can find essential oil profiles online. A lot of them are very affordable. And a few weeks ago, I wanted to, I have isolates of, say, myrcene. And so I can identify myrcene on its own. And I really wanted to practice identifying it in a bouquet. And so I chose to get some high myrcene essential oils, because has that terpene in it, in its almost isolated form, right? Essential oils are 95% terpenes, so very robust, strong smells. But it has a bunch of other stuff mixed into it. So I really wanted to see if I could find myrcene in this oil called buchu, which is just a very high myrcene essential oil aromatic. And that's another way to start tying that smell to other things. Like, can I identify it in something with other things in it? Can I identify it being distracted by the other smells in that bouquet, which is essentially what we're doing with cannabis. No one strain has one terpene. So we're always going to be having these sensory distractions of all the aromas, trying to hone in on what exactly it is that's present, especially if you're working with homegrown or you don't have access to the profiles. This is part of
Right. And it's, the more you develop that skill, the more helpful it is, because in top tier best herb that you can get, like, yeah, great, I'm getting a lot of orange peel and juice and these like spicy notes, but the more it gets towards like mids territory, the more it is going to be one note, and you might have to struggle or dig in there a little deeper to pull out those individual notes, because when it's not like turned up to 11, then you really have to get in there, you know. And you were talking about shapes earlier, and I think that that's a really great place for a lot of people, like especially if you're a very visual person trying to picture what that scent looks like in your mind, right? And then even more so, the more you can kind of like read about perfume, where sharp has a meaning and round has a meaning, which are probably the exact meanings you're thinking of right now, because it does make sense. The more you can kind of connect what the shape of a smell is and compare it to others, which is, hey, great, another way to separate them in your mind and communicate them with other people. And I think if you told me something was very round and you handed it to me, then I could easily agree with you, because that's a set point that has like a very clean descriptor, you know?
Yeah. So interestingly, when I work with a lot of essential oils, and peppermint is a fun one because it's in the mint family, and it's really high in menthol, which, as we know, is a type of terpene, and actually, interestingly, is a solid, not a liquid. Fun fact. So peppermint, there are many different kinds of peppermint. Mentha arvensis, Mentha piperita, so like Japanese peppermint, true peppermint, corn mint. There's all these different ones, and they're all going to be really high in the same terpene because it's mint. However, what's interesting is that I find Japanese or true peppermint to be really, really sharp and really, really spicy, like tingling, high, minty peppermint in your face. But corn mint, which smells almost exactly the same, is round. I can't explain it. It's almost like the difference of a peppermint leaf and a peppermint candy. It just has this slightly sweeter, more rounded aromatic that's a little more on the soothing and a little less on the spicy. And again, they're both in the same family. They're both going to probably have extremely similar terpene profiles, but energetically and aromatically, very different essences. And I use them very differently in essential oil blends and in aromatherapy. I wouldn't swap one for the other. To me, they're very, very different smells.
I love that. And really, the greatest way to tell the difference is just practicing and just getting your nose in there and thinking about it and thinking, okay, how can we compare this to this other thing, and what's the difference about them, right? I think citrus is a really good example, because it's really present in cannabis aromas on every shelf or wherever you can find it. Some people love it, some people hate it. It can be really at the forefront, or it could be kind of in the background. And it's really easy to be like orange, because that's the most basic citrus. But we can blow that out into a million things. Is it yuzu? Is it grapefruit? Is it the skin or the peel or the pith or the juice? Like, there's just so many parts of an orange that we can dig into and allow that to, like, our expression of citrus be much more specific. And if I said, oh, hey, this feels like a really soft navel orange that's like extra juicy from a tangerine, and then like a little lemon zest on top, it's like, boom, we just took orange and turned it into 3 different descriptors that do give you a really idea. Okay, it's going to be kind of muted orange with this like one bright sweet note, and then that like sharp sourness of a lemon. And I think anyone who's not well versed in smelling all of the vegetables and fruits at the grocery store for an hour like I do could still take those like three citrus descriptors and have a better idea of what that herb has to offer.
Absolutely. And orange is such a great example because there's bitter orange, and you can imagine what a bitter orange smells like. There's sweet orange, and we can imagine what a sweet orange smells like. You mentioned tangerine. Tangerine is almost like a sweet orange, but a little softer, a little suppler, you know. And so even these three things, we have a white grapefruit, we have a pink grapefruit, and these are just quite common fruits. You can think of their flavors, you can think of their aromas, and you can start to distinguish things. And even something as simple as identifying a sweet to a bitter orange aroma, those are two excellent words to describe smells that you can use to describe other types of smells outside of the orange family. So this starts to create a vocabulary that you can tap into when you're looking for ways to describe different things. Lime is another great one that we've talked about in the orange family as well. If you look to essential oils, petitgrain is the like the stems of orange, so that's called petitgrain essential oil. We also have something called neroli, which is orange blossom, and that is super floral, a super strong kind of grandma's bathroom smell. Once you smell it, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's like it's its own thing, and it's a lovely blossom. And so, you know, we can start to look at some of those, and neroli is interesting because we would actually consider that a base note. So we could start to get real complex with it here with our top notes and our base notes.
Right. Well, and also we'll see terpenes like nerolidol, which is found in neroli. That's where it was discovered in cannabis, right? And you know what kind of scent that imparts because of its origin, right? And so I think that this is the perfect marriage of you know, just like develop sensory stuff from just sticking your nose in a bunch of bottles and being really interested in what the next thing smells like. And also like the knowledge you have of where these things come from and their origin, and also like maybe even which regions of the world that they like are originally from, because all of those things can inform like what it actually does smell like, right? Or which cultures might be more interested in something. You know, the green tea that I go and can grab from like Starbucks is way different than the green tea I would find at like a little cafe in Japan.
Yeah. You know, I've been seeing this thing going around the internet about how you can look at any object and your tongue knows what it feels like. And I think I use
Oh, this
that.
is dangerous knowledge you've just given me, Amanda.
Oh, did you not know that?
No,
Oh,
no, I haven't. But now I'm going to be distracted for the whole rest of the show, just knowing what
you
all
can
of my entire office here is going to
you
feel
can
like.
look at anything and your
Yeah.
tongue knows exactly what the texture is going to be. It's super weird. I try to do that with smells. So like even now you're saying green tea, I try to like bring that aroma to my forefront of my senses. So as I'm thinking about smells, as I'm talking about smells in my own time and in my day-to-day experiences, I really try to call that to mind, you know, because really that's what it comes down to is, can I recall these things? They're all in there. We all know what green tea smells like. We know what every citrus fruit we've ever eaten smells like. Anything we've ever tasted, we know what it smells like. It's just a matter of being able to call that into mind when you're smelling something out of context. And this is sort of the biggest piece of the aroma puzzle that everyone has to sort of get over that hump, which is that humans are not good at identifying aromas out of context, which is exactly what we're doing when we're talking about smelling cannabis. You're looking at a green leafy thing and you're telling your body, what does it smell like, without anything to go off of. If you were smelling a grape smell and you saw a grape, you would immediately be like, that's a grape. I can smell that. If you're working off any type of list. So a lot of scientific studies that have been done on aroma, cannabis, and otherwise, often they're working with context to it. They have a list that people are working off of, because generally speaking, most people, when handed a smell, and this is actually could be like a fun little challenge too, where like maybe you go buy a couple of essential oils and you try to just, without looking at the labels, smell them and figure out which one's which. And obviously the easy ones are going to be easier and the harder ones are going to be harder. But eventually that's part of the challenge, is to like hone that out of context ability to identify what it is that you're experiencing very specifically in cannabis or in coffee or in perfume, anytime it's out of context of the thing itself.
Yeah. And find a fellow scent nerd, or do what I do and just raise one and just start from when they're 3, like waving a chocolate chip cookie behind a napkin, being like, what does this smell like? Because now my friends do this, but mostly me and my kid will take the essential oils and we'll kick back. And when the root beer scent hits my nose, I'm super excited because A, it's really identifiable. Root beer, I know exactly what it is. But B, okay, I know I'm getting this one right, root beer. And then C, hey, root beer smells great. What a cool like bouquet of scents that root beer is. So it's just a fun thing to sit back and practice on, and it's really pleasing for your brain. So I think that even folks who feel like, here, I'm like face blind, I really do not recognize people I've met a dozen times. I'm sorry, that's how my brain works. But I have a really good memory for scent, in that if I can smell some Jack hybrid, then I'm like, this immediately reminds me of the best Jack I've ever smoked in Maui in 2001. And I can tell you where I was standing at the hostel when somebody handed me the bag, right? It's just, that's how my brain works. And I know from trying, I can get better at identifying faces and being like, oh, that's my daughter's friend's dad. Hi, shake your hand, dude. Still working on your name. You know, so I know that it's something that if you feel like, oh, I'm no good at that, like I can't do that, you can. If you can stick your head in an apple pie and smell cinnamon and crust and apples, boom, you're there. Like you have the capacity to do this.
Okay, these are really great examples, because I think apple pie, root beer, cookies.
Yeah.
Often when people are describing cannabis aromas, if something had the essence of any of those in it, they would say sweet.
Sure.
And sweet is a great umbrella term, but is it, if you have a food hidden behind a curtain and they're saying, what does it smell like? And you're just saying sweet, that is really boring. We want to take it a step further when we're talking about aromas and say it's root beer, it's pie, it's a cookie. Let's start to bring down the descriptors to really take it further. Root beer is a great example, because root beer is actually an aromatic of sweet birch essential oil. So sweet birch is another one where when you said root beer, I thought, oh, sweet birch, nice.
Exactly.
And when I say sweet birch, maybe I describe that essential oil as root beer. So we can start to kind of come full circle in ways we're describing things that people can really relate to and people can really start to understand. And that sounds like fun. I want to live in your house and just be giving cookies and pies and have to smell them first.
Please come by. Yeah, we'll hide like pumpkin pies in the cabinet and you can sniff it out. That's the real thing. No, there's only like 300 master somms in the world, right? And a master sommelier is like the highest level of wine tasting taster you can be, right? And it's this test you can take. It's quite rigorous, where you basically need to be able to sip a glass of wine and say, this is from this vineyard, this winery, this grape, this year. Right. And so it's very demanding on, all of your sensory faculties. But when you break down how these master somms take their tests, it's relatively simple, and it's something we can apply to cannabis as well. Right. So I brought up the master somms because there's only 300 of them. One of the most famous, I forget his name. His parents would hide cookies in the house and make him sniff them out this very French existence of like, oh, you can have dessert when you can smell it. And so, you know, myself growing up as like a hedonist and putting all of that on my kid, like, yeah, great, we're gonna eat all the apple pie, but let's turn it into a little game first. Um, but that I've tried to take some of those sommelier techniques and apply them to how I'm smelling cannabis. And so one of the more rigorous things that they do in the test is you have essentially 2 minutes and 20 seconds per sample. And so if I'm taking notes on something, I'll spend that 2 minutes and 20 seconds, sometimes going a little over, just with my voice recorder on and just put everything behind, or not think about anything else but what this smells or looks like, depending on what I'm writing, and just blab into that for a full 2 minutes and 20 seconds. The timer goes off, I stop, listen to that back and write down everything that still really connects with me. If I'm like, oh, I said cotton candy, listening to that back, like, no, that's more of this like caramelized sugar note or whatever. So write that down, right? And then you've got like a nice broken down chunk of words that you can build something off of and maybe pick the prominent three, or maybe say like, oh, I really feel like this deep funk here is the bass note, and kind of apply that and then talk about what the top notes are or whatever. So that's kind of an approach I've borrowed. What other techniques are you using when you are really getting into a sample?
Yeah, so I it's very similar, interestingly. I didn't know this is cool to hear. I didn't know that was your technique. That's very neat. I never thought about going about it that way. I'm a very list-oriented person, and so usually when I'm coming across generally like just a new aroma, whether it's cannabis or my whole life is weed, so it's probably weed and or terpene blends. I do first, second, and third impressions. So let's just use a terpene blend as an example. So I'll waft the blend. So I do the waft, not a heavy snork, just like a gentle waft. And I try to pinpoint just the first thing that comes to mind. So it's okay if my first thought is sweet. I don't, it's cool. You got to start somewhere. So maybe identify that it's sweet. And then I give myself just a couple seconds, regroup, and I do a second pass by. And I try to think, what am I getting this second time? But I really force myself to give it a better description. So I take the second time around to see if any nuanced aromas are coming through, or to, take the sweet descriptor, my first descriptor, a step further. And then usually my third round, I take a little bit longer with it. I do a few sniffs. I sit with the aroma. And I try to, again, just really bring in more words, bring in more descriptions. What does it remind me of? What am I thinking of? Are there any smells that are coming through that I didn't get the first time? And so that's similarly is like a top, mid, and base note. Your top note is typically notes that are going to be higher aromatics that evaporate faster. That's why they're considered top notes, because they hit you first and then they tend to evaporate. So those are generally flowers, like floral smells tend to be top notes. Citruses are generally top notes. So that's why a lot of times people will just say, oh, it's citrusy. Every freaking strain is citrusy, because on your first waft, you're always going to get citrus because that's the top note. Mid notes tend to be more herbaceous. They tend to be your pines. They tend to be your herbs like a basil, an oregano. You're getting your more stems of things. Like if you think of a plant, the fruit is on the top, then there's the branches and leaves, and then our base notes generally are the woods, so you get more of the woodsy aromas on your third pass, and base notes tend to linger longer. That's why they last. They're a heavier, slower. They're slower to evaporate. Base notes are typically quite resinous, so like your sandalwood. I'm trying to think. Base notes can also be the sexual organs of flowers. So like jasmine or ylang ylang, even though they're florals, they're actually technically base notes. So there's exceptions to the rules. But if you think of ylang ylang, it is very heavy of a smell, and it really lingers and it really sticks in your nose, like it hangs out. So that is a classic base note. And so taking a few different moments to waft through and actually experiencing the whole smell all the way through is equally as important as a first impression. Knowing how terpenes work and how they do evaporate at different speeds, let's say, and they have different molecular weights. So scientifically, they're doing different things at different times. So I usually kind of just go about it that way. I let myself get sort of a few impressions in, and by writing them down, that's really the start of your sensory evaluation. And that's the easiest way to describe something. You start at first, I get a sweet note followed by an interesting air, like woodsy aroma, followed by whatever, and so you can actually take these first impressions similar to what you're doing, and form a sensory evaluation. And that is literally just describing the smells, which everyone is so puzzled about. That's really the simplest way to do it, because you've created a profile within just a couple minutes. Usually for me, I do the whole thing in like less than 5 minutes.
Yeah. In like judging competitions or whatever, where we have to go through like 20 of these in a day, and smoking them, it's like having that down in 5 minutes or so is really handy, because great, you've done that and you've got nice descriptors and you have enough there that if you smell something, say you smell like a watermelon gelato and a cantaloupe gelato, and they're very similar profiles, you didn't just write down the same 5 words for each, right? When you're talking about the different notes, I really thought like a classic OG was kind of the perfect example, where you get these top notes of like diesel that are going to flash off really quickly. Then you have these mid notes that are more like a lemon pine. And then you have these base notes of like that, I like to call it like river water or like fresh forest, right? And those being the base notes, think about it as like a cologne or a perfume. Those are going to be what's still there at the end of the day after you've sweat and ran and been in the sun. And that's also what older OG is going to smell like, or the OGs that have not been properly taken care of or cured. There goes all the gas. Maybe there goes all the lemon and pine. Maybe you still have this like earthy base note, which is enjoyable, but not quite the same as what you're going to get with that like fresh cannabis that had all of its terpenes well preserved or like still intact.
Absolutely. And I think about that a lot. Last year we started this evaluation that we do here, which is as we're actively harvesting, we do aromatic profiles of all of the weeds. So we're looking also at quality, for breeding purposes. We're looking at the quality, we're looking at the color. Did it get powder mildew? Did it get seeds? Like, we're looking at undesirables as well. But a big chunk of what we're doing is smelling it and determining whether we liked or didn't like the aroma, what exactly it is that it smells like. And then we'll do a second pass a couple months down the line once everything's cured. And as we start to trim things and start to compare and see how we've maintained the aromatics or how they've evolved. Because even if you have the best humidity and perfect drying conditions, which nobody does, it's still going to change over time, the plant. There's actually a really interesting study. I'm trying to remember what it was, but they were testing the terpenes at different points along the way, pungency, strength, but also just the actual smell of it. And it does just change as chemically as the curing process occurs. The terpenes are dynamic as well, and they're changing it up. So yeah, it's interesting to know that things are going to change and different smells are going to be different. Like the OG, when I fresh chop it down out here, is not going to be even close to what I get if I smelled what we cut last year. It's going to be very, very different, but still worth exploring and still worth describing.
Yeah, well, and really great example. I think we've done a nice job of showing how you can get started as a hobbyist with nothing, just what's in your pantry or a trip to the grocery store, and then level up and have all of these bottles of essential oils or isolated terpenes around, right? And then at scale, doing this and applying it to the actual industry where you have like very dedicated spreadsheets and you've got tagged sheets from year to year, and you're looking at the cultivars this year, comparing them to last and keeping track of them while they're growing at harvest, and then again in the cure, right? Because all of those are data points that are going to help you maximize profits next year, we'll say, because that's important to any small business. But they're also like you developing your skills in a very applicable way to what you're working on or what you might work on or future projects. And all of these things have incredible value. Just keeping track of what's going in and how it turns out, and it totally informs what to do next year and the year after that. Like you said, this project B96, maybe if you had kept no notes, you would have been like, that one was super dank, and then next year started a bunch of new stuff that never even like could have hold a candle to the B96 of 5 years from now.
Yeah, I think meticulous note taking is one of the underrated skills of people in the cannabis industry, because we forget very quickly the details of things, especially if you're just a heavy smoker, and you try a new strain a week. You're not going to remember a year from now exact details of the strain you tried 52 weeks ago. So it's kind of the same, but multiplied by a lot of plants. I did want to mention something. You were talking about two different melons, and I actually remember because we did a smell series on a different podcast.
Yes.
And that was really good. I think our episodes were actually really, really solid. Maybe we'll link them somewhere in here. But that series was really great. And one of the episodes we talked about how smell works in great detail. And one of the things we talked about was how you can become nose blind by over smelling something. And that we can actually, as aroma professionals, use that as a technique to identify smells further. So when you smell something a lot, eventually those your senses burn out on that and you stop smelling it. And the example is if you work in a garlic factory and you eventually stop smelling the garlic. And not forever, just for that afternoon, while you're at work. So we can apply the same thing to cannabis. And while we're smelling that, if we have two different OG strains and you really huff into one for quite some time, get yourself a little nose blind and then smell the other one, you're going to notice the subtle difference, because that's the only thing that's going to come through. And so you can start to really pinpoint different aromatics in the same family by forcing your nose to lose its ability to smell that family of aromas.
Yeah. Well, and really same thing with the melon example. It is those minor differences that make these things stand out, right? And it's also the thing that is the consumer or whoever you're trying to communicate with is going to connect with and go, holy cow, I was not looking for jasmine in this, but when I smelled it, like it was an instant connection. I could not forget it. I probably wouldn't have noticed it unless you said something, right? And I think those are like the big, powerful aha moments where you go, oh yeah, I'm going to remember this for the foreseeable future, just because it locks in, right? And then that's it. Then it's there.
That's the thing. Eventually it does lock in. At first, when you first get terpenes, which like isolated terpenes are amazing. If you want to practice smell, getting your hands on some, a lot of terpene companies will send you samples for free. Hot tip. So reach out to a terp company, see if they'll send you a handful of samples.
Yeah, just tell them you're formulating your new candle line, or whatever. You're developing breath strips. Great, here you go. Here's some terpenes.
A lot of companies will send you small samples for free. So this is a hot tip, and this is a good way to start your terpene library. And when I first got my hands on my first set of isolated terpenes, I was like, oh man, there is no way I'm going to be able to memorize these. I'm smelling them. It's not making any sense. And it felt very stressful, but it's similar. It's just, your brain wants to learn them. Your brain will start to memorize them. It is much easier than it sounds once you start to just really make a conscious effort to think about it. Even as you're walking down the street, the other day, a woman with very strong perfume walked by me. And normally I just think, oh, it's a strong perfume. But I stopped and I was like, but what did it smell like? Like, I really have been trying to force myself to take that little effort. Oh, you're walking down the street and you pass by a restaurant. Maybe it's garlic, maybe it's smoked meat. I'm really making myself start to form these connections out of context. As far as having context when you smelling cannabis, we are working on a project, have been, maybe by now it's ready, and it is to help people who are interested in getting better at smelling cannabis find the aromas. And essentially, it is a very comprehensive list of umbrella terms and very specific smells that go with them. So you can start to hone, if you have your cannabis and it smells sweet, you can look at the list, you can look at the wheel, and you can see, oh, these are the popular categories of sweet. So which one of these is it? And that's another way that you can start to actually make the smell mind connections.
Yes. And then even more so, like, differentiate your products. And so everyone, like McGee says, sweet is the first word that comes to our mind for pleasant, right? Very few things actually do smell sweet, right? We're lucky enough to deal with cannabis that has smells like burning sugar and has these like really specific bakery smells where you can actually smell something like a yeasty rising bread or a chocolatey cookie in the cannabis. So we have these we have a wide range of flavors to choose from. And if you could say something is like a sweet sage, then you have just totally leveled up your scent description than just saying sweet, right? So I think it's going to be really handy for a lot of folks, and we'll be yelling at everyone to go check it out when it's completely ready.
Yeah, yeah. And it's going to be really helpful. That's one of the tips that I give people. Just this week, I was asked by a grower, how can I get better at smelling my products? And I said, get your hands on this list because it's really going to help you to contextualize the aromas as you're honing your aromatic skills. So if you don't have time right now to start memorizing and, that kind of thing, if you're out in the garden and you just have a little list in your pocket, you can just start to reference it because you're going to be able to smell it, and right away you're going to be able to find the category that it fits into. So we've been saying sweet, but there's also spicy, there's also woodsy, there's citrusy. So you find that category, and then you have to create your personal impression or be able to reference an impression in context in a list, which will actually make a really big difference for describing your cannabis as you go.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, Amanda could make this list this year at Harvest and then update it in a couple of weeks, couple of months when all the products is ready. And then someone else could come in and make buying decisions on seed stock or planting decisions based on your descriptions. You know what I mean? Oh, hey, the market said that they really wanted more like woodsy strains or things that were more uplifting. And great, you've already got this all laid out for them. These are the 12 uplifting strains from last year. These are the 6 that had that kind of bubblegum aroma that everybody loved. Like, great, we're going to dedicate this much greenhouse space to it.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the applications, maybe not endless, but for, this industry, there's a lot that you can do with this.
I think the sensory impressions and sensory evaluations play a huge role, especially here in Canada, because we have a really serious lack of R&D happening and really strict regulations on listing effects of things. So I think these descriptors can point to a bigger picture. So instead of saying stimulating or sedative, we can actually say, I feel like we talked about this last week a little bit too, but like cheerful, or we can create like these more vibrant, adjective rich statements that aren't just this linear, is it one or is it the other? And we can start to go into this whole other realm of things that we see in perfumery, that we see in now these days coffee, that we see in wine, of course. And these other agriculturally based products. You know, a glass of wine doesn't really describe its effects, neither does beer, right? It's a
Right.
consumer. It comes from an agricultural product. It's talking about its overall vibe. And I've never seen wine or beer or perfume ever described on a linear scale of energetic or sedative. That's not a thing. So it's insane to me that this is how we're treating this whole other category of things. Like, why is it one or the other? It's absolutely not. So yeah, like, we have many other ways of describing many other things. And actually, when you were describing the stolen car earlier, it really made me think, like, I swear I've seen that on a can of beer. Like, that's the kind of vibe you go for when, you know, a
Yeah.
beer wouldn't say gets you so drunk you fall asleep. So why does weed say that? Like, oh, it's so strong, you're going to go to bed.
Yeah, yeah, and it's too bad that most of the attempts we've seen at kind of selling a vibe were really like cheesy and eye rolling, and we've seen some of those really fall apart. Hall of Flowers is next week, and if you don't know what that is, it's a big trade show that has open consumption or has consumption areas in Santa Rosa, California. A lot of the California brands will be there showing off their products to other retailers. So they really are saying, put my product in your store. And so it's a lot of money goes into the show. There's a lot of marketing. There's a lot of people trying to sell a vibe. And it's interesting how people do that. A lot of times in the past, that's been with like borrowed cartoon imagery. And thankfully, we're here in the industry is growing up a little bit. I remember when Stravinsky really came hard with their very specific orange color that they use with all their branding, and so many companies followed suit with orange branding. It was like, okay, you can have an original idea in cannabis, I promise you. But I say all of that to say that there's going to be some really excellent examples of people marketing their product with these like evocative wine country type campaigns. And then there's going to be others who are still relying on the like, hey, it's a dank cartoon, bro, fire. And we'll see like what is attracting more people, more consumers. What are people more excited about this year? I have a feeling it's going to be the more elevated experience, but hey, we'll see.
Well, that's, you know, if we're trying to create a luxury industry, then that's the first step, is to elevate it, elevate our descriptions. You know, wine could be like hot chocolate. Nobody talks about hot chocolate. Okay, maybe I picked the wrong thing because you're a chocolate guy, but
Well, it's a good example. Yeah.
you know, when you think of hot chocolate, you think of a children's beverage. You don't. I drink hot chocolate, but it's a wine is this super sophisticated, presents as this thing, and I think people really, you know, cannabis is really divided on it. But even spirits, you know, like people get silly when they drink liquor, but it still always presents as this somewhat elevated experience and description of the experience of consuming the spirits. And these days, think of cocktails; they have burnt orange rinds and smoke coming out of them, and people have really finessed them to this very artistic, sophisticated, they're beautiful, right? It's like this stunning beverage. And so we've started to see this elevation in products that we are everyday consumption products. Coffee is another one. The way it used to just be cinnamon art, and now we've moved into this whole other world of fancy things that are happening with little coffees and such. So cannabis is bound for the same level of glory as these other luxury agricultural goods. And so I think we're going to start hopefully to move away from, yeah, like cartoons, don't get me wrong, still vibe with those, but into these better, more, I don't like the word sophisticated because it does sound a little dry, but it's like tasteful, thoughtful maybe is the word I'm looking for, something a little bit more thoughtful in the approach to how we're advertising it. And just sort of my last thought about describing aromas as we move into this era of refinement.
Yeah, that's where we're at.
Is that at the end of the day, once I've done all of these things we've talked about, practicing smells, memorizing terpenes, identifying aromas, finding the category or the umbrella, refining the adjectives, refining the descriptions, one of the techniques that is recommended from a book that I really love called The Nose Knows is the way that they describe smells is kind of a very specific type of equation. And in this context, they're describing perfumes. And I really like comparing cannabis aromatics to perfumery because it is this bouquet and it is also this vibe that we're trying to sell. And so what they talk about in the book is that you want to have a combination of the ingredients and imagery to tell the story of the smell.
Oh,
So you can use the ordinary adjectives like woodsy, fresh, sweet. Then we're going to combine it with a technical term. So that's where we could throw in sesquiterpenes, limonene, beta caryophyllene. We can throw in our technical esters, whatever, our technical aromatic terms that we're slowly honing. Plus, we're going to combine that with an emotion. So that emotion is where the energetics and description can come from. And in the book, they describe it as like a summer's day or stealing a car or the cool metal of a blade, right? We're going to start to create an imagery that ties into, and the imagery can be based off of our smell memories. And so it's the combination of all of these elements that creates a dynamic and interesting sensory profile, aromatic profile that people will want to engage with and want to read and ideally try your product.
Yeah. So if you are going to love this fuel forward, dank, foresty middle note OG that feels like being dizzy at the carnival, then like great, we're pretty close. Like all right, hey, I'll click buy on that one, and then when I roll up for like curbside pickup, not be too disappointed, you know. So I think that's really getting everybody closer to where we need to be, right? And I love that equation because it is the perfect blend of expression and communication, right? Which is what this whole thing comes down to. It's all the things that we can get better at. And it's also saying like, you can have as much fun as you want with this, right? Like I've taken sensory analysis courses and it's a little dry. It's a little bit like, can you identify how much pepper is in this jar compared to lemon scent? And then how much lemon scent is in this jar compared to pepper scent? That's great. Okay. We can do that all day. But if it's the expression, it's talking about the smelling like the oldest book in the library or whatever, where I feel like
that's so evocative. Right away I was like, yes, that's like it's the cellar door of finding the cellar door of the cannabis world with smells. Yeah.
And we have all of that license here. So it's like when you talk about all the steps that we routinely go through to like have like a really nice vocabulary of these scents, like it is a lot. It's like a daily thing that we do, but it's so fun. And the freedom is there to do any of these things. And the demand for better description is there too. So it's like, this is just like a win-win-win type hobby or situation or industry to get into if it's something you're interested in, because it's so young that we're developing it as we speak, and we need all of the voices we can get for this.
Absolutely. This is that's where everything's going. And as we look to other industries, we're on par. So we're going to be right up there with the other delicious smelling things and tasting things. I mean, tasting sort of the next step, but smelling is my favorite place. So,
man, I can't wait. So the podcast like launched for real last week. Episodes are going out. We've got a few banked. So as those roll out, we get to to kind of like live through those older notes of people listening to the podcast for the first time. Really cool. Love all the feedback we've been getting. Send even more our way. I know that we have a smoking spot that we want to share. Amanda, will you tell us who that's from this week?
Yeah, this week's smoking started slurring my word. I'm in a sunroom. It's getting very hot in here.
We're wrapping up. Let's
I'm
get
like
you out of here.
my face getting a little flushed. Yeah, I'm in a sunroom. It is the heat of the day. But yes, we have an awesome smoking spot today from a person named Harmony. Their Instagram is P is for pot. They're always posting really awesome content. So I was very excited to get their smoking spot. And here it is.
I think my favorite sesh spot would have to be someplace home, cozy, with a nice fluffy blanket, preferably watching South Park or some dumb show that rots your brain. But this is all because, you know, when you first start smoking, you always have that one place when you close your eyes that you always remember. And that would be in my university years in my best friend's house that was right behind mine in Kingston. And that's where I learned to smoke my first bong. And boy, did I completely crush my lungs and learned what South Park was after growing up in a very conservative and strict upbringing and family. So it's wonderful when we talk about where our favorite sesh spots are, because memories make a difference and they have a special spot in our heart. And those are the special places that we always could go back to. So I guess my answer is twofold. In the comforts of my home or my mind at my best friend's house way back when, with South Park humming in the back and us passing the communal bong.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. We always appreciate those. Go ahead, tap in on the social media at the.smokingspot.com. There's no .com on there. It's just Instagram. So
I got it. I agreed with you.
you're like, yeah, .com. No. At the.smokingspot. Find us there. Go ahead, send us a little direct message, DM, voice recording of your favorite smoking spots from when you were young, from when you're older. You can tell us about smoking and stolen cars. We don't care. If
You know
the
what,
7 years
though?
has passed, you're in good shape.
I've been loving these smoking spots because I have a ton of smoking spots memories over the years, and even harmonies that just played. University smoking spots. I totally had a secret spot in university that we called. Oh shit, I'm trying to remember the name. It was like the heating vent. It was just like the heating vent spot. And it was literally around the side of like a main building was a fucking heating vent. So if you stood in this like one square, it was warm. And obviously I live in Canada. So, and our campus at that time, the one that I went to, was built for actually California. And then they didn't sell it there. So somehow the design got sold in North Toronto.
I
So
love
the
this.
whole freaking place was a wind tunnel. It was so cold in the winter. And the heating vent, was it the heating vent or the tunnel? I'm gonna remember it and I'll let you guys know next week. But that spot was always warm and there was no snow because the heat would melt the snow in that one square. So that was always our fun spot. And I remembered that as I was listening to this smoking spot this week. So very
That's so
smoking
perfect.
spots, you guys. Very, very relatable.
Yes, keep them coming. Everyone that comes in, I'm just like laughing because I'm like, yes, I could completely relate to climb out on my parents' roof and all the other ones.
Yeah.
Cool. Much love to Gator Troubadour, who did our awesome intro, outro, and I don't know if we had a break this week, but hey, the little break music is by him too. Go find him on Bandcamp and Instagram, wherever else. Find me at the Loud 100 on Instagram. Amanda, where can we find you?
It's at Emerald Temple Living with some dots in between. You guys have been finding me, so I believe.
Yeah.
And I think you've been finding Ryan too, so that's good. And I've been trying to follow up with everyone's questions from the first episode. The feedback has been so lovely. We've been working on this podcast for a very long time. This was birthed in a different podcast, and so it's really nice to finally launch the first episode on the back of recording what is now the fourth or the fifth, and getting all this really good feedback. It's actually really lovely to put something you've been working on into the open and have people tune
And
in.
get the positive feedback. So yeah, more good things coming for the podcast, better sounds, more fun things to download and that kind of thing. And we would really appreciate it if you know another fellow weed nerd that just drop them a link. So give us 5 stars if you don't. And hey, if you have a nice little rating for us, drop that there too. All of that helps people see the show.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, that's all the time we have today, everyone. But we'll be back next week for more. So tune in.
Said no matter what kind of pain and anguish life may bring you, oh, smoke it up, hold it down, and don't ever stop. Well, you can always find your smoking spot. Yeah, you can always find your smoking spot.